Hi, I'm Caroline Leavitt. I'm the co-founder of A Mighty Blaze, the book initiative that began when the pandemic did. We helped bookstores whose doors were shuttered. We helped authors like myself whose tours were canceled. And we hope we helped readers find, new books and all that kind of stuff. We hope you will support us by subscribing. We have one of my favorite authors of all time and one of my favorite books that I've just been telling everybody about. Leaving by Roxana Robinson. It's just a gorgeous, gut-wrenching in the best possible way book. I've put in for all of you a handy place where you can order it on bookshop.org. It'll help your local indies. Very easy. Just click on it and you can buy the book, and you can buy every single one of Roxana's books as well. So let me tell you a little bit about Roxana and about this amazing, amazing book. Let me get to the bio. Roxana Robinson is the award-winning author of 11 books, 7 novels, 3 collections of short stories, and a biography of Georgia O'Keeffe. 4 of her novels were chosen as New York Times notable books, 2 as New York Times Editor's Choices. Her fiction has appeared in The New Yorker, The Atlantic, Harper's, Best American Short Stories, and elsewhere. Her work has been widely anthologized and broadcast on NPR. So let me just read you some of the praise. Kirkus, who can be snarky, has said, elegantly structured and written, shimmering with feeling and truth, a triumph. Lee Smith says, Roxana Robinson's brilliant and utterly absorbing new novel, Leaving, charts an unprecedented passage through the depths of emotional complexity. I could not put it down. The Washington Post raved, Roxana Robinson's stunning new novel cost me some sleep. Me too. And continues to reverberate. Me too. A study of the complex joy and pain of late life love. It's a tour de force and arguably her finest work yet. This is absolutely a brilliant, brilliant book about a 50-something woman who encounters a man she had loved nearly 40 years ago, except now he's married with a daughter who objects to him leaving her mom. So welcome, Roxana. I am so honored and thrilled to have you here, and we're all so excited at the Blaze to host you here. And I just want to show this gorgeous book cover again. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Caroline. You do so much for books and for authors. I'm honored to be on this show. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I absolutely loved the way this book was written. I mean, it came as a complete surprise for me. It's so engrossing. It winds back and forth from the past of both these 50-something lovers and then back again. And I started to think it's always fascinating how we think we feel one way about something when we're young, and then when we're older and we look back on it, our experiences change those feelings. And sometimes we don't even remember how we felt when we were young correctly. Do you think that such a thing like that ever stops? Can we ever really know what's real in order to know what the best thing to do about our situation is?
Well, you always look back at things and say, oh, I would have done it differently in this situation. But there are also things you look back at and you say, thank God I did that. So you haven't destroyed your own path. You have created your own path. And there are times when you look, I have a friend who's a therapist, and she's incredibly generous and compassionate. And we were talking about things we'd done as kids that were awful. And she told me about a time when she and all her friends had been really mean to another little girl. And I said, God, how could you have done that? And she said, well, it's just something I did. I did it. We all did it. And I thought, oh, she's forgiven herself. And that's the way you forgive other people, if you forgive yourself. So that was another way to look at things like that.
I love the two characters, Warren and Sarah, they're very different and they behave in ways that you don't always expect them to behave. So I wanted to talk about Warren because when Sarah first meets him, she loves him. They're in love, but she feels he's too adventurous for her. And she feels this wrongly so. Maybe not wrongly so in the moment, but when they re-meet again, it's definitely wrong. Was it important because of this for us to also get Warren's point of view in the book? I mean, I thought it was, but I wanted to know your thoughts.
Well, for me, I had to have Warren's point of view in the book because the reader doesn't know enough if all she has
Right.
is Sarah. And Sarah did make this strange move during college. She breaks up with Warren, and looking at it, you can see why that was really a mistake, and the choice she made was a mistake. The man she chose to marry did not turn out to be a good husband. But she's afraid of what Warren offers, and also in the context of that time, when she's thinking about hippies and stinky apartments, and everybody, dishes in the sink and dogs in the bed, and the kind of chaotic life of drugs and rock and roll that she did not want. And she thought Warren represented that. He didn't really, but that was part of what she was turning away from. And she was afraid what he was offering was something that was uncharted. And that was great for her.
We were talking about this before in the whatever color room the Blaze has before it's not a green room. What really got me in this novel also was the way we look at our children when they're grown, that you think you have your children when they're little, and you do, because you're the center of their world. And then when they become adults, they have to pull away. But we don't expect them to pull away as much as they do and become their own person. And that is something that both Sarah and Warren struggle with, but in different ways. Sarah, her yearning for her daughter is palpable. I mean, she just wants to be a part of her daughter's life, even as she knows that her daughter's grown. She's pregnant. She has a life of her own. With Warren, it's a little different because it's Warren's daughter, Kat, who, I'm not giving anything away because it says it right on the corner of the book. Warren's daughter, Kat, objects to her father, who is married, leaving her mother for Sarah. And I found that so interesting because it leads to the question, what do we owe our children, and what do we expect our children to owe us? And I really wanted to hear you talk about that a little because, I and a lot of my friends are struggling through mothering adult kids in their late 20s, and we don't know what the boundaries are. What are the boundaries to love with your kids?
So it's a really interesting question, and one that I have been dealing with. I have an adult daughter and 2 adult stepchildren, and nobody knows what the boundaries are. There are no rules in family. So you just make things work as best you can and keep talking it through. But it's painful. I mean, you are, as a mother, you expect to be bonded to your child through your whole life. And that's not what your child expects. And if you think of yourself with your own parents, that's not what you expected either.
Right.
You knew that you yourself was you were your own agent. You planned your own life. You didn't expect your mother to come camping with you and your boyfriend. That was not the plan. But as a mother, you think, of course, I'm camping. I love camping. I'll come with you. So, you
I'm laughing, even though inside my heart is breaking. But I know what you're talking about. It's like, that's just so smart.
And then as to Kat, I was watching the world around me and seeing that adult children have a great deal of power. And having written about divorce earlier on in my career, I wrote a book called This Is My Daughter, which is about a couple trying to make a blended family with stepchildren, and how resentful and how angry children are at divorce. And no matter what we say or think, it's devastating to children. And when you're 5, you have no control over your parents. You get shuttled back and forth every 3 days or every weekend. You can't stop it. But if you're an adult, you can have a lot to say, and your father can no longer get you on weekends. So it's a very different story.
Yeah, as I was reading it, I kept thinking, how would this be different if Warren's daughter was 6 instead of an adult? Or how would it be different if Sarah's daughter was, you know, 4 instead of this? And it was interesting too about their daughters' lives, because Kat is getting married. She's having her own life and probably her own child and everything. And Sarah's daughter is, well, she's going through a difficult pregnancy, but she's pregnant anyway. And it's sort of, the lines of demarcation are so muddy that it was so fascinating to me. And I don't know if you can answer this, but I was really curious about it. And this is just a testament to how realistic these characters are, because I'm thinking of them every day and I'm worrying about them. And I wanted to know, is Sarah okay today?
Yes, she is.
She's okay. What about Kat, without giving anything away? Is Kat okay? Has she changed at all?
I don't know what Kat set up something, a barrier inside herself that was so implacable. I would say that if she allows herself to respond to what's happened, she would change. But I don't know that she can allow herself.
That she can. So I want to talk about opera, because this novel is, I think this is the most operatic of all of your novels, which is definitely a plus for me. I was a little girl that used to watch stories from the great operas when I was 5, and they always had English translations, and I just loved it. And I love Tosca, and Tosca is so vivid in this novel. It's practically a character. So first I wanted you to tell us what made you choose Tosca. And there's a second part of the question, which is, why does Warren, a Tosca-loving character, make such wrong choices? I mean, I felt like this is strange for a man who has such a love for opera and betrayals to start thinking about his moral code, because in operas, people are reckless. You know, they're all about passion and recklessness. So please talk about all of that.
So I can't exactly explain why I chose Tosca. And somebody else said, why did you start it at this moment? I can't exactly say, except my husband introduced me to opera years ago. And because of him, I've been many, many times, and I love it. And I don't love it as a scholar. My husband is much more sophisticated about it. He understands, I don't know how the music works. I don't understand any of that, but I love the stories. And I love the way music amplifies emotion, so that the story itself on paper is not nearly as dramatic and powerful as it is with the music. The music reaches us in a way that the words cannot. So I was really interested by that, and I wanted to put opera into this story. And I did go to this performance of Tosca that I describe, and it was, oh, hold on, that's my phone barking.
Oh.
Sorry, I thought I'd
No problem.
So that particular performance of Tosca was incredibly dramatic and wonderful. So I just wanted to have that be part of a narrative. And when it turned out it was perfect, but I didn't plan it that way. And there was a moment at an opera years and years ago. I was downstairs on the main floor at the Opera House in New York. And I looked up, and on the balcony of the next floor was a woman I knew. She didn't see me, but I could see her, and there was a man standing behind her. She had very long hair, and her hair had fallen over her shoulders, and she turned halfway around and spoke to the man behind her, who was her husband. And it was such an intimate moment that I could see, and she didn't know I was watching her. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I just thought I was so struck by the fact that you could watch someone's private life, interior life in public like that. So that sense of an intimate moment taking place in the most public arena that you could think of was part of why I had Sarah and Warren meet at that moment, because opera, as I say, it amplifies emotion, and the very fact, the presence of opera implies passion and beauty and art.
I absolutely loved it. there's a lot in this book about how love changes as we age and what we wish we knew when we fell in love at a young age. I was started to tell you a story before we came on here, which was about my mom, who always hated men, hated all my boyfriends, had no interest when my father died in her 50s to find another relationship. And then when she was 93, in a independent living place, she fell passionately in love with this other guy who fell passionately in love with her, and it changed her whole personality. And it was a great gift to me because they stayed in love until my mom died at 101. And I thought, what a great gift that is. But so anyway, so I want your thoughts on how do you think love changes as we age, and what can, these two characters, that was like actually quite a risk for them to embark on this with grown children, and their lives are sort of settled. And even though it ended the way it ended, I would think that they would both feel that it was worth it. So can you talk about that?
So one of the reasons I started this, one of the reasons I became interested in this phase of life was that I was at a family engagement party years ago, 15 years ago. And there were a lot of people there I didn't know. And a lot of them were older. And there was a woman in her 70s or maybe 80s, probably. Little old lady with permed white hair and pearls and a little silk dress. And she was really cute. And I was asking her questions. She said, we were in a club in Boston. And she said, I was standing in this very room, standing right here, when I looked across the room and I saw Peter and I fell in love with him at that moment. And I said, wow, just right off the bat. And she said, off the bat. And I knew I would marry him. And I did. And I said, oh, that's so wonderful. How long ago was that? And she said, 3 years.
Oh my God. Oh my God. I love it. Love it. Love it. I just love it.
So well, that's I had not thought about that. I didn't know that was how things worked when you're in your 80s. It's just like your mother.
It does. I mean, it does. There's no reason. There's a societal narrative that it stops, but it actually doesn't. It doesn't have to. Oh my God. I have to ask, was her Peter there? He's still alive?
He was here. Yeah. He was right across the room.
Oh, I love it.
Made her think about it. And the other thing, which was less dramatic, but more interesting, this was also 15 or 20 years ago. And I was at a fundraiser party. So I was meeting older people that I didn't know. And I was talking to a man who was probably 20 years older than I was. He's in his 70s or 80s. And I was asking him where he lived and stuff. It was in Maine. So these were all sort of summer people. And it became clear as he talked that he was living with another woman who did not have his last name. And I said, so wait, so are you? And he gave me this smile. He said, we're living in sin. And I said, oh, okay. And he said, we're not going to get married. We would upset all the legal, all the legalities, and the financial arrangements are already made, and it would upset our children. So we're not going to get married. So we just live in sin. And I thought that was so interesting because in the 60s and 70s, when sexual liberation was invading the culture and making it possible to live in sin, which was something that, that represented radical behavior. And there were people who were trying to shock the bourgeoisie.
Right.
He was not trying to shock the bourgeoisie. He was the bourgeoisie.
That's right.
And this is no longer radical. So I thought, okay, this is another interesting thing, that members of this older generation are behaving in ways that I never expected them to. And they're responding to passion and emotion, and they are stepping around the law, and they're doing what they want. So I just thought there are rules that I had never thought of that are being broken here, and I need to know more about it.
I loved it. I just think that's amazing. So here's a sentence in the book, one of many that I just loved, where it says, art is someone's passionate interpretation of the world. You could say that about literature too. So do you feel that when you're writing, that it's your passionate interpretation of the world?
Yes, I do. I only write about things that engage me at a very, very profound level. That it's something that I feel very strongly about. So I guess that is the way I would describe it. Yeah, it's only things that I find really important to me at this moment. And I need to communicate this feeling to the world. So that's what I try to do.
I love that. I always tell my writing students who a lot of them unfortunately want to write to the market. And I always tell them, don't do that. Don't do that. Write about what really matters to you, and then it will come universal.
Mm.
Most of the time they listen to me, but not, not always. Okay, so I wanted to ask you, again, without giving anything away, do you think if Warren had made a different choice, it might have worked out?
So it depends on the person that you believe Warren to be.
Right. That's interesting.
And for him, the idea of a vow is really serious. And the idea of honor is really serious. And that's something else that interested me about this set of characters in this situation. And honor is not something that is fashionable to write about. It's not something that we talk about. It's not a word we use very often. And yet I believe that everyone has an internal moral code. We think of ourselves as the kind of person we want to be. What's the kind of person we want to be? Every one of us has an answer to that. And we can all justify decisions we make. My friend could say, well, we were just mean to that girl. Like we just were.
Right.
That's how we needed to be at that moment. And there are things you can justify and there are things that you cannot justify. You say, if I do this, it's not the person I want to be. I don't want to look back at this tomorrow and see that I've done this thing. So every one of us has a moral code, has a code of honor. And in Warren's case, that meant that he could not choose differently.
All right. So here's another moment that just shimmered for me. Early on, Sarah says that being in a marriage is like being on a tightrope. You cannot look down. And of course, that phrase about looking down reverberates at the end. So please talk about that tightrope. And because it not only planted the seed for everything to come. So the first part of the question was that intentional on your part, or was that just your subconscious planting that? And second of all, I just want you to talk about the whole idea of a marriage as a tightrope and why it's that way for Sarah and why it might not be that way for Warren.
So the idea of the tightrope is, and I have a terrible fear of heights. I could never walk a tightrope.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
but I know what it feels like because I can imagine it. And so what it requires is faith and a sense of balance.
Right.
So my point is not that you can, I don't know what, do some balletic thing with your feet. It's faith and balance. And that in a marriage, as anybody who's been in one for a long time knows, there are moments when you risk losing that faith and you think this is not working. And so you have a choice of saying, and yet I have faith that if I continue, it will start to work again. I will keep my balance. So there's that sense of, we all know what it would feel like to say, okay, I'm done with this. I can't stand the way you feel about X, and I don't like the way you talk about it, and I don't ever want to have this conversation again, and I'm done. Or you can say, I want to keep this conversation going. I don't like what you're saying, and I'll tell you why I don't like it, and I want you to tell me why you keep saying it, and you can keep making that work. So you choose. You're going to keep the faith. You're going to keep your sense of faith in your own sense of balance, or you're going to fall.
It's very interesting that the two things that I used to think about long marriages and about kids when they grew up are very different than the reality. I mean, a long marriage is so much different than those first heady days when everything's passionate and, over the top. And there's something really lovely about a long marriage because you can work it out if you really want to and if you don't allow yourself to get carried away. I wanted to ask you about this book because this book, for me anyway, it read a little differently from your other books. And I was trying to figure out why. I mean, I loved all your other novels, but this one, it just burrowed under my skin and it hasn't left me yet. I wanted to know, did you have a feeling that this was a different book for you as you were writing it, or after it was out and people started responding to it? Or is that something you don't even think about? You just write.
I don't really think about it, but somebody else said it's more like This Is My Daughter than it is like Cost or Sparta or Dawson's Fall. And in those other books, I always write about the family because I think that's where all the
Right.
hardest
It's
emotions
drama.
are. That's the crucible. But with Cost and Sweetwater and Sparta, I was also writing about larger issues. And so
Right.
I was and in this, but in This Is My Daughter, it's just about these four people. And this is just about really four people. So I have retreated from the larger world in order to focus more deeply and powerfully, if I could, on this intimate question of connecting with people, which is really what I always write about, is how do you connect, and what are the obstacles, and how do you surmount them?
We have an audience question. I'm just going to post it, which is, come on. Sorry. Do you have a favorite book of yours? One that you yourself have written. I think
No,
that's what they're reading.
no, I don't. Each book I write in a kind of fury of urgency and confusion. And at the end of it, I think, well, it's not perfect, but it's the best book about this subject that I could write at this time. That's how it is. I never reread any book I've ever written.
That was going to be my next question, but also I think it's so important that you mentioned confusion, because I think it's important for any would-be writers out there or writers out there to know that somebody as accomplished as you are feels confusion when you're writing.
Huge confusion, huge confusion.
I love it. That is really great. That makes me feel a lot better. I would like to know, when you were starting out, what's the best advice someone ever gave you, and what was the worst? Because there's a lot of both out there.
Oh, Well, my beloved husband, who is my biggest supporter and favorite reader, and he's always my first reader. When I first started writing my first novel, I told him I was writing it, and he said, "Do you have an outline?" And I said, I was really flummoxed, and I said, "No, I don't have an outline. Do you think I should?" He's a lawyer, and he said, "Well,
Oh, well, he would have an outline.
writer would have an outline." But now he's done a lot of big projects, and he knows better than I do. So I thought he's right. I should have an outline. So I did an outline, 20 chapters. This is what happens in this. This is what happens in that. So I set out to follow the outline, and not a single character would do what they were supposed to in any outline. And I had to throw the outline out after about 2 tries. That was not good advice.
Well, at least you tried it. You tried to the advice.
It was very well meaning.
Did you know you weren't going to be a writer when you were, a teenager or before? And were you encouraged, or were you told to get a real quote unquote career?
I always loved to write. It didn't occur to me that everyone didn't love it. It seemed to me that was a sort of a natural human response to the world, that everyone liked to write the way I did. But as I grew older, it became clear to me that everyone didn't want to do that. But it never occurred to me that I should or shouldn't use it as a career. There are lots of writers in my family, so it was a very familiar path for me. My great-grandfather was an editor. There are lots of ministers in our family. My mother wrote for the local newspaper. It was a very familiar process for me. And I did get encouragement. My teachers, especially in high school,
Right.
were very, very supportive, and in college too. So yeah, I was encouraged.
That matters. We have another audience question. What do you look for in choosing a book to read?
The voice. If I don't find the voice I want on the first page, I don't want to read the rest of the book.
I always read the first page, and it drives my husband crazy, but I always have to read the last paragraph of a book. It doesn't spoil it for me, but I like to know, okay, I can get an idea, like if the book is going to gut me or not, in a good way, in a very good way. And I have one last question for you, which is I ask every writer I interview this because I obviously am a very obsessive person myself. What's obsessing you now and why, Roxana?
Oh, what's obsessing me? You mean, what am I? I'm not writing anything at the moment, just because there's so much going on.
There's too much going on for you.
So much going on. Yeah. I mean, politics are obsessing me at the moment.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Nothing to do about that but hope.
Yeah.
I want to show this gorgeous book cover again, Leaving by Roxana Robinson. Don't forget, I put the buy link right in the chat so it makes it really easy for everybody. Or you can walk to your fabulous, famous independent bookstore to pick it up. It's just a magnificent book. It really is. I can't stop talking about it because I love it so much. I want to thank all of you for tuning in. I really want to thank Roxana for tuning in. I've never really had a conversation with you about your work. So this is such an honor for me and such a joy and so exciting. I will see all of you next week. And also know that this interview is going to live forever on the Mighty Blazes YouTube station. So you can tell your friends. You can watch it as many times as you want. It's going to also be a podcast in a few months. So you can check back and listen to that whenever you want and tell your friends. So thank you all. Roxana, you sit tight and I'll just talk to you when this is over. And thank you, everybody. See you next week at Lit Stream.